Research has found that women diagnosed with PCOS engage in disordered eating behaviours 4 times the rate of women without PCOS. And then if you're doing gymnastics, if you're doing dance, that even increases your risk more because you're in a type of sport where you have to be a certain size or a certain image. So anyone who has PCOS or endometriosis, you are at increased risk of binge eating. And then the eating affects hormones, and it's this vicious cycle, and that affects self-esteem, and that affects everything.
Today, we are diving deep into the world of eating disorders, food, and mental health with our guest expert, Stephanie Georgiou, a clinical psychologist and the author of Food Jail, Breaking the Bars of Binge Eating. She sheds light on the blurred lines between eating disorders and something called disordered eating. She also explains how societal pressures and childhood experiences shape our relationship with food, and shares practical strategies to achieve food freedom and build body image resiliency. Stephanie's approach to breaking down complex topics into easily digestible, pun intended, insights makes this conversation both informative and really empowering. So if you've ever struggled with your relationship with food, or you want to understand more about the mental health aspects of eating, this episode is for you.
Welcome to the What's Eating You podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie, and I'm a psychologist, published author, and public speaker, here to educate and validate. Enjoy the show.
It's time for confession. Stephanie, you have quite a big following on social media as a clinical psychologist. What is it that people go to your social media for? What are the messages or the topics that you are so well known for discussing?
Great question, Brittany. I honestly think it's because I break down complex mental health topics in really easy to understand chunks of information. And I guess my delivery is quite enthusiastic and out there and informative. So I feel I bring that edutainment together, educational, but also a bit entertaining.
I definitely noticed that. I followed you on TikTok quite some time ago, and I was like, the enthusiasm in your content was fantastic. I was like, this is great. A clinical psychologist with this level of enthusiasm. And it just really hooked me in with the content that you were creating. I noticed that your content has this big emphasis on eating disorders, disordered eating, the way we approach food as women. So bringing it back to basics for anyone that's listening, what exactly is an eating disorder? And then what's the difference between that and disordered eating that I've heard you talk about?
Yeah, such a great question and so important, because 75% of people who have disordered eating or an eating disorder will never seek help. And I think it's because that line is quite blurred. So if we think about a spectrum, we've got regular eating or normal eating, which is when someone's not dieting, they eat when they're hungry, they stop when they're full, they don't really think about food too much. And then somewhere along the line, they might decide, I'm going to go on a diet. And then we've got dieting. And this is where people try to control their food in some way. Maybe they're weighing it, maybe they're counting calories or macros, and it might be for a period of time. Maybe they've got an event or a health concern. And then you've got subclinical eating disorder. And this is your disordered eating, where people are thinking about food more often. It's occupying a lot of their mental real estate. They're skipping meals. They might be feeling guilty when they eat, might be eating in secret, hiding food, wrappers, and it's taking up, a lot of their time, a lot of their energy. But when it's a clinically diagnosed eating disorder, that's when it's affecting your life on a consistent basis. So that occupational, social functioning, but also it fits in a specific criteria in the DSM-5, which is the Bible that psychologists use to diagnose people. But it's not much different, to be honest. The real difference between disordered eating and eating disorder is going to someone, getting diagnosed, and that this behavior is negatively impacting your life and it's been happening for a period of time.
So can someone basically just live with a disordered eating habit continuously and they don't necessarily need help for it?
They need help, but they won't get help because they think it's normal. They just think, you know what, if I lose the weight, I'll be fine. They think weight loss is the answer and that they need to just lose weight and everything will go. The food guilt will go, their body image will improve, their binge eating will disappear, but they have all these problems because they have disordered eating.
How can someone recognize the signs then between an eating disorder versus disordered eating habits and when they would need to get help?
If it's occupying your mind on a consistent basis, do you go to sleep thinking about what you ate? Do you go to sleep saying, tomorrow will be better, I'm going to not binge eat, it's going to be a good day? Do you focus on food? Are you constantly thinking about the next meal? Are you hungry all the time? Because a lot of women are under eating. Do you feel guilty when you eat food? Do you avoid social events because you're scared you're going to binge? Do you binge, which means eating a large amount of food in a short period of time with a feeling of loss of control? Do you compensate? Do you feel weight gain? And compensation means trying to undo the damage of a binge, like laxative use, purging, making yourself go to the toilet, all that sort of things. These are the signs, and so important that you seek help because, as mentioned earlier, so many people won't, and it does not get better. It actually gets worse with time.
What about guilt? You hear some women will say, I felt really guilty after I had that piece of cake or that little chocolate bar. As you said, it starts when it impacts your life and it's controlling and you're constantly thinking about it. So is it okay for someone to just have a little bit of guilt every now and then when they eat a bit of cake, or is that potentially heading into the direction of those thoughts and that thinking mechanism surrounding the way you're approaching food?
Yeah, I like how you said that. It's like guilt in moderation. No, it's something that's come from our society, from our culture. And if anyone's listening to this and you experience food guilt, I want you to do an exercise and think about, when do I feel guilty? Is it because of what I'm eating? Is it because of what I've been told by the media or by people in the health and fitness industry? Is it because of the quantity I'm eating? So when I get people to log their food when we're working on recovery, I was like, what was it that made you feel guilty? Is it that you think you're breaking a rule? I shouldn't be eating chocolate. Is it because of the amount you ate? And everyone's is a little bit different, but essentially food guilt is when you think you've done something wrong. So guilt is when we think we've done something wrong. And it happens when our thoughts don't align with our behavior. So you're thinking, I shouldn't be eating this, but you're eating that cake. And because these don't align, that causes cognitive dissonance, which just means discomfort or disharmony or that psychological squirm. And people don't like to feel uncomfortable feeling, so they'll try to get rid of it. You know what? I've stuffed up. Who cares? I'll just eat everything. I'll start tomorrow. Or they'll compensate. So I don't think guilt in moderation is helpful, especially if you don't need to feel it. It's all self-imposed. No one's telling you should feel guilty for eating that cake.
It's that self-punishing mechanism where the guilt most likely comes from. I know this personally. I was someone who used to, if I'd have a piece of the cake or the chocolate or whatever it was, there would be so much guilt with, you shouldn't have done that. And then this thought spiral would start to happen of, you're a bad person, your lack of discipline with food. And as you said, it ends up going into a territory where it does impact your mental quality with your relationship with food.
100%. And I will add, it's not just you. Parents will comment. And this is where messages from childhood get internalized as your own message. So growing up, so many people I've worked with, their mums would say, you need to do something about your weight. They'd take them to Weight Watchers at 10 years old. They'd put them on the diet shakes. It's traumatizing as a young kid to be constantly told, you're fat, you need to go on a diet, there's something wrong with you. Because as a child, we have a blank slate, we have a blank mind, and all the information that comes in, we then internalize that to, I'm fat, I'm not good enough. And then those messages dictate our behaviors.
Very interesting, because I have personal experience with this. So not from my parents, but I was an elite gymnast. So there was a real pressure to look a certain way. I also had PCOS when I was younger. No one knew. So it was very difficult at that time for me to get to that form of a gymnast that you should particularly be. And the pressure that I would feel, I felt like I wasn't good enough and I wasn't doing enough because of the environment that I was constantly in. Probably not necessarily at a fault of the coaches or anything. It was just that was the way that it was. But the psychological impact that would put on you was so detrimental that I ended up going on something called Duramine when I was 17. And I lost all my friends because there was this doctor that would prescribe it and they weren't supposed to. And it was basically, it felt like you were on speed. So you would lose your appetite. And all of us lost this copious amount of weight. And I look back and just think, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that to myself. I cannot believe I felt so bad about the way I was trying to keep up with society's standards that I took a drug to try to suppress my appetite to that extent.
It was so easy to get back then. I remember my mum would get Duramine. You just would get it. And it's essentially, for those who don't know, Duramine is a pill that you take and it's like speed essentially, or what's it called? Ephedrine. It makes your heart speed up. You literally are awake. And I used to take it and because I wanted to lose weight, but also I'd study so intently for hours and hours and hours. Don't recommend this to anyone, and this is not medical advice, disclaimer. But yes, back in the day, it was accessible and you could just get it over the counter, but it wasn't not over the counter, but it was easily accessible, I think.
Agreed. As you said, it was so easily accessible. I think now it's definitely, there was a crackdown on it that happened around 10 years ago. But it was a story that I still think of to this day, where I went, wow, that relationship with the desperation to potentially look a certain way and how influential things were at your age of 18 in terms of the way you were with food. And as I said, I had another friend, she lost, oh my goodness, it must have been like 15, 20 kilos on Duromine. And she started to look really unwell. And that was when the light bulb went off and I thought, what I'm taking is not good for me. This is actually going to, and it started impacting my mental health as well. So I've heard you mention now intuitive eating as well. So can you explain how intuitive eating works and why would it be so beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I say that, I want to say something. Did you know that there's actually a link between eating disorders and PCOS? Yeah, research has found that women diagnosed with PCOS engage in disordered eating behaviors 4 times the rate of women without PCOS. And then if you're doing gymnastics, if you're doing dance, that even increases your risk more because you're in a type of sport where you have to be a certain size or a certain image. So anyone who has PCOS or endometriosis, you are at increased risk of binge eating. And then the eating affects hormones, and it's this vicious cycle, and that affects self-esteem, and that affects everything. It's something I've really started to tap into because a lot of women who come to me, I realize, oh my gosh, you have an eating disorder and PCOS, there must be a link. So we can do another episode on that, but I thought I'd mention it.
I didn't know there was a link, but that makes sense because the desperation when you have PCOS, as I said, I was lucky in terms of I wasn't someone who was severely overweight, most likely because I'd done so much gymnastics. But there's such a desperation when you have PCOS to want to lose the weight and you're doing all the things and the cardio and you're trying to eat right and it just doesn't, the weight wouldn't budge. So then it becomes, as you said, that would make sense why you would go down an eating disorder route because you're like, everyone else is losing weight and I'm doing all the same things they are. Why is that not working for me?
Exactly. And you go to a doctor or a medical professional and they're more likely to suggest diet advice. Oh, you need to lose weight. So I'm trying when there's so much more there with hormones and everything. So yeah, the emphasis on weight and health, which we know weight isn't always an indicator of health, is a risk factor for eating disorder psychopathology.
I was put on something called metformin at the time because I ended up having insulin resistance and going into type 2 diabetes. I dropped about 7 kilos on metformin and then went underweight, like severely underweight from this medication. I couldn't put on weight. My journey around weight has been, I said, I was always not overweight. I only carried an extra 4 or 5 kilos with the PCOS, but the journey of up and down between what am I eating and this, and thank gosh I reversed all of the PCOS signs over the last 7 years. Like really, as you said, started focusing on the right things, the right exercise, the right food, the right supplements, all these different aspects to reverse what was happening with PCOS. But it took me a long time to get there, really long time.
Undiagnosed ADHD in the mix as well, because ADHD, impulsive behaviors, dopamine seeking, eating food, it's all linked. So you had a cocktail of things, the ADHD, PMDD, PCOS. Wow, that's amazing. You've defied the odds.
I had all the things. I had endometriosis as well. Like I'm like a walking medical textbook when people start to actually hear the story that I've been through. Do people that are more neurodivergent have a higher susceptibility to developing an eating disorder?
Yes, it's so high. So basically the reason is if you're neurodivergent, so you've got autism spectrum disorder and you've got ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. ASD have troubles with eating, but for different reasons. What we find is ASD are more likely to fall into the category, and I'm not saying that people with ADHD don't struggle with binge eating or bulimia, but it's more ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive feeding intake disorder, which is extremely picky eating. It's more about textures. It's more about fear of a negative consequences, like fear of anaphylaxis or choking or being sick, etc. We see that, but then with ADHD, we see a lot of bulimia, a lot of binge eating disorder, because again, they have lower levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, so they're looking for that dopamine in food. The second reason is struggle to regulate your emotions, so using food to calm yourself down. And the third is dealing with stress. When you have ADHD, especially undiagnosed, it's stressful. Why am I always late? Why can't I do anything? What's wrong with me? And that causes disruption and stress. So we eat to self-soothe. It's easy, it's accessible, it's there. And then it's really interesting because some people who struggle with purging and bulimia will report that they get almost this euphoric feeling from purging their food, or they get this relief, and I think it does have to do with the dopamine as well. And just on that note, while we're here in the neurotransmitter space, people with eating disorders do disrupt their dopamine and serotonin levels. When you starve yourself, your brain is getting starved and your neurotransmitters become off balance. The good news is if you stay in recovery long term, you can reinstill that dopamine and serotonin, but it takes time. But people don't give themselves the time to fully recover. And that's the biggest issue.
I haven't heard someone mention that before, because I noticed that in the same space with some of the premenstrual disorders is some women don't give themselves enough time to actually recover and stay consistent. So I think consistency and time and patience is a huge key when it comes to mental health, endocrine disorders, like all the things. How does someone then learn to change their relationship with food to a healthy one? Does that come back to potentially that intuitive eating side of things? What does a healthy relationship with food actually look like?
Yeah, sis, I know. And I think it's so important to ask yourself that, because this is what I ask when people jump on a call with me. I'll say, what's your idea of food freedom? Because it can be different for people. For some people, it's, you know what, having 2 chocolates and saying, yeah, okay, that's great, instead of a whole packet. For some women, it's eating a chocolate without thinking about it for 3 business days. So you've got people who are very restrictive, and then you've got people who lack the control. So that really varies. And for the listeners, I would encourage you to ask yourself, what is a healthy relationship with food, or a balanced relationship with food, or positive, whatever you want to say. I honestly think it really comes down to food not taking up that mental real estate. Being able to eat a cake or a piece of cake without having this whole saga about it. I shouldn't be eating that. Should I eat it? Oh my God, is there enough protein? Da, 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 da. You kind of eat and move on. You don't think about it. But a person needs to go through a series of stages to get there. There's a lot of videos like, oh, intuitive eating doesn't work. It may not work if you're in an active eating disorder, because you don't know what your hunger or fullness cues are. They've been stuffed up. So intuitive eating, essentially, right, is we are all born with the wisdom to eat. We know how to eat. Like, you can't force a baby to breastfeed. It's going to eat when it's hungry. It's going to stop when it's full. And the problem is parents need to be really careful and respectful of their children's eating cues, because growing up, we're really, eat everything on your plate. If you finish that, you get dessert. And I understand parents are just trying their best, but this actually shuts down the natural intuitive eating abilities. And it also can be psychologically damaging to tell someone what to eat and how much to eat. People will say, I remember my grandma was like, you have to finish this, or I was forced to eat mushrooms and now I can't eat mushrooms. But from a young age, our intuitive eating gets muted by diets, by parents, by social media. It's just eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full. Basically, that's it. Listening to your cues,
listening to your body, listening to what's right for you. It's interesting, as you said, as a child, I was very fortunate with my parents never forcing us to eat anything on our plate that we didn't want to eat. But I had so many friends that would, and I remember I'd go to their house and they would then, when I'd go for sleepovers, and they'd say, you're supposed to finish everything on your plate, and they'd force me to eat. And I was so not used to it because my parents didn't do it with me. And I had this one friend, she was from a Russian family and they ate a lot of olives. And at the time I didn't really like olives, and she forced me to eat these olives. And I couldn't eat olives, as you said, for 15 years because someone else's parent had put this association with that. I was forced to eat a food that I didn't want to eat. So it's so impactful from such a young age.
Essentially, what I want to say is it takes time to get to intuitive eating. So as mentioned, you have to go through a stage. There's different stages of it. And when people first start a food freedom journey, they go through what I call the honeymoon phase. Some people might, where we really just let go of food rules. You eat whatever you want, whenever you want, but we have a structure that people eat. And you might go on a bit of a food honeymoon because you're eating all these exciting foods that you may restrict yourself, and you might overeat and you might have more than you want, but it's about changing those thoughts and becoming more self-compassionate. But once you move through the honeymoon phase, you will get through to the intuitive eating phase, but it takes time and it takes practice. And you have to go through these processes to also love and accept your body. So the 4 stages we need to go through is food structure, learning how to eat again, because women don't know how to eat. I had a lady who's been following a meal plan for 2 years because she doesn't know how to eat without one. Yeah. And it's really extreme. And then once you've got food structure, So notice I don't tell people what to eat. I don't tell them how much. We just have a structure that reduces binge eating by up to 80%. Then the next step is regulating your nervous system. If people don't know how to deal with stress, if they don't know how to deal with their feelings, they go to food. So if we have strategies to deal with emotion regulation, that eliminates high percentage of binge eating. Then the third stage is enhancing your brain. And this is where we change and reprogram all the food rules. I shouldn't be eating that. Too many calories. Oh my gosh, I feel so guilty. I feel so bad. Unless we change thoughts, Brittany, nothing changes. This is why women are in the same position they were 10 years ago, because they have the same thoughts about eating the same damn donut. I shouldn't be eating that. I should be good. I have no control. I might as well binge eat. Why is it that one person in the office has these thoughts and the other person says, yum, that was delicious, and then moves on with their life? It's their thoughts about the donut. So we change those thoughts, reprogram them. And then the last phase of food freedom is body image. And it's learning to embrace your body image and build body image resilience now that you've healed your relationship with food.
How does someone become more self-aware then? You might have someone who, as you said, it's a lot of negative self-talk in a way. If someone isn't even aware of that negative self-talk, how can someone take steps to even become aware of how they're talking to themselves?
Such a great question. Food logs. So in phase 1, everyone in my program logs what they eat. But not just that, they log the place they eat, whether they think it was a binge, whether they purged, and thoughts, feelings, context. Tell me one coach, personal trainer that tells you to log your thoughts and feelings around food. It's all MyFitnessPal. It's all calorie based. How are you going to build your awareness around that? And this is the thing. Who logs their binges? Who actually tracks? What we measure, we can manage. And if you're not tracking your binge eating, you are never going to change it. So you develop your awareness by logging. And we log this in real time using a format that I've got. I've even got a free binge tracker. We can put it in the show notes that people can use, because this builds your awareness around the behavior. And we can't change what we don't acknowledge.
Can you break it down for the listeners that might not know what actually is binge eating, what classifies as binge eating, and why, I guess, do we do it? Like you said, it's coming from thoughts and it might be coming from the way we talk, but what actually is it? And when do we usually see it occur?
Binge eating is eating a large amount of food in a short period of time with a feeling of loss of control. And you feel guilty, you feel ashamed. There's a lot of negative feelings. Now, if that happens at least once a week, for a month, you could have binge eating disorder if it's negatively impacting your life. So binge eating is the behavior, the disorder is whether it's impacting your life. Why does it happen? It happens because people are under eating. They're not eating enough throughout the day. They try to save their calories. They skip breakfast. They've dieted for so long that they just can't do it. And then the minute they have chocolate, they break a dietary rule. So as soon as you break a dietary rule, I shouldn't eat chocolate. Screw it. This sets off what I call flat tire syndrome. So it's like you're driving along the highway and one of your tires pops and you get out and you think, oh, I ate a piece of chocolate. Oh, well, my tire popped. I'll just get out and slash all my tires. I'll just eat 5 blocks of chocolate, right? Everyone's like, that's me. So that's the first reason it happens. But I also want to highlight that people who have binge eating disorder are not always preoccupied with their body weight, shape, and size. So majority, yes. And then you've got people who aren't really diet culture, who've had trauma or they've had some sort of sexual abuse and they're eating to fill a void, or they want to put on the weight to become as quote unquote undesirable so that men never catcall them, or they're not putting themselves at risk of being assaulted. And these people, their weight, shape, and size is the sort of last. They're not worried about that. Like obviously their health's at risk. So shows like My 600-Pound Life. It's always a traumatic incident. When I was younger, my mum was never around. I just ate popsicles or whatever. It's very American, but that's binge eating disorder in its prime.
It really does seem to be that a lot of the relationship we have with food, it comes from these beliefs and our childhood and the structure around the food, as well as trauma. Most coping, it seems to be that food is just another coping mechanism. It's another, you've got alcohol, drugs, all these different things, and food just seems to be another one in terms of how people can potentially gain control. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and it's the most socially acceptable and easily accessible as well. And we're secretly programmed at a young age. Don't cry, have a lollipop. Oh, shush, 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 yeah, have some chocolate. When you go to the dentist, or when I was a kid, you went to the dentist, you've been such a good girl, have a lollipop. So from a young age, we reinforce ourselves with food. Or I've had a hard day at work, I'm going to have a little sweet treat. You see it on social media, you see it everywhere. Like, food is a reward. And even like marketing, even in your adverts, it's like, have you had a hard day? Like, grab your Uber Eats app. It's glorified, it's celebrated, and compared to meth, it's more socially acceptable and cheaper.
It's so true. I see the ads for KFC, and even around the women, like, oh, let mum have a night off, like order all of the KFC, this reward mechanism. So it's subliminally happening to us all the time.
Oh, and the money people spend, especially with ADHD, Uber Eats, they will not let you get out. You try to call your bank and like cancel their ability to. I had a lady with an Uber Eats addiction, and she was spending upwards of $700 a week on Uber Eats. And she tried to call the bank, she tried everything, and they make it so hard to delete the apps. But she's doing amazing now. No more Uber Eats addiction.
What else would make someone susceptible to developing an eating disorder? Are there any other risk factors? We've talked about neurodivergency, even PCOS, trauma as a child. Are there any other things that would make you susceptible to developing an eating disorder? The likelihood of developing one?
Being a woman, growing up in Western culture. Do you know what I mean? I always wonder, if we grew up in Bali, or if we grew up in a completely different society, would we have these issues? There are countries around the world where big is beautiful, but it's this society. The princess was always skinny, and the ugly stepsister was always had a big nose. Like, from a young age, we have been taught that appearance is so important, and it's how you should value yourself. So I think, being in Western society, your gender, being a female, it's not to say that men don't struggle with eating disorders, disordered eating, even body dysmorphia, with muscles and all that as well. But family too, if it runs in your family, if you've had a mum that's always dieted, which was the case for me, growing up in an ethnic household, always dieting, but they didn't know any better. They didn't know about nutrition back then. And the TV, every advert was a new diet. Oh, the lady shake, or the Jukin diet. Or I remember on Sunrise, like, Oprah would always be on something, and she still struggles to this day.
It's so true. Like, Mum, I love you if you're listening, but my mum ate this diet. I can't remember what it was called. It was basically fruit every day for about 8 weeks. And I attempted to do it. And obviously PCOS, it didn't do anything. But my mum went on it several times where she literally ate fruit every day for 8 weeks. She dropped a copious amount of weight. But I look back at that and go, oh my goodness, that's also, you're eating so much. Fruit has sugar still as well. There was so much to it that I went, my goodness, but I watched her do this continuously. And again, as you said, she didn't know about nutrition to the same. She was also a very tiny person. Like, I come from a very French Canadian side. They're all very petite naturally as it is. And it was just interesting because it definitely did play a role in also then thinking, if mum's doing these sorts of diets and this sort of eating, then it's also potentially what I should do. But again, she didn't know any better. And I don't think it was something she wasn't doing. So, Mum, I love you. But I do remember this fruit diet. And it was a really famous diet at the time. And as I said, I tried it, didn't work. And I just, when you look back in hindsight and go, what was I doing?
And it's always something extreme. And what happens is, whenever someone goes on a diet, they have the honeymoon phase. So the first 2 weeks are like, this is amazing, this is working. They're on that sort of euphoric rush of doing something new and doing something different, kind of like being in a new relationship. And it gives people purpose. It gives people connection. There used to be all those accountability groups. Like, oh my God, we do this together. I lost 4 kilos. It builds this like cult community as well. And even The Biggest Loser, that show was so messed up. And we all watched it. And if you go back and watch it, you'll be horrified. They're like, Cindy, you only lost 5 kilos. You know, like, that's a lot. And the way they were bullied and yelled at and fat shamed, oh my gosh. But yes, so family can definitely increase your likelihood of developing an eating disorder.
What is, you mentioned before, body dysmorphia. What does body dysmorphia do in playing into eating issues, and what is body dysmorphia?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because contrary to what people think, body dysmorphia, it's not an eating disorder. It actually comes from a whole different section on the DSM-5. And basically, body dysmorphic disorder is the preoccupation with a real or perceived flaw in your appearance. So it's more than being fat or thin. It's my nose is so big, I can't go out in public because my nose is really big. And this preoccupation with, like, it could be a minor defect, you might have a little bump. It causes clinically significant distress where you might be mirror checking for up to 6 hours a day. I had a lady who didn't have mirrors in her house for years. So people either frequently check, frequently avoid. These are the people on My Strange Addiction that get surgery after surgery after surgery. And you're like, whoa, what doctor would perform this? Because they look completely abnormal. And it's because these people get plastic surgery thinking it's going to fix the problem. And then it doesn't. And this is why BDD has one of the highest mortality rates, because people suicide because they don't realize it's a psychological disorder. And until they've seen doctors and doctors who might suggest, oh, see a psychologist, they don't know. But you can have both. You can have body dysmorphic disorder and an eating disorder. I mean, 40% of people with anorexia will have body dysmorphia. They think they're bigger than they are. But yeah, it can be completely separate. It can be about hair. It can be about your lips, your skin, anything.
So it's not necessarily just because you have body dysmorphia doesn't mean you necessarily will have the eating disorder, but they can be sort of commonly correlating in some regards.
Yeah. And I think you can have body dysmorphia without having body dysmorphic disorder. So dysmorphia is, just thinking you look one way when you actually don't. Your perception is morphed. Your perception is skewed in some way. And this is why people with anorexia, they have this really skewed perception of how they look. They think they're so big, and that's what stops them getting better. So the word dysmorphia, it's deformity or abnormality in a shape or size of a part of the body, but it's distorted. It's not actually real.
In your opinion, how can we as a society or in general promote a healthier body image in the younger generation? Like, what strategies can be encouraged for body positivity amongst the young women that are coming through? Like, in your opinion, what are the things that you'd like to see or that you would encourage?
Yeah, well, the first thing we do in the 4th stage of food freedom, which is body image resilience. And I like this word because no matter what your body is, I know women who have the most perfect bodies, you're going to have bad days. So I think it's about building your skills to handle those days rather than think, I love my cellulite every day, because it's not going to happen every day. So body positivity is great, but body resilience is really helpful on those days where you don't want to be positive about your roles or your acne or whatever it is. The first thing we recommend is things to stop doing, because there's things that we do that perpetuate and reinforce body dissatisfaction, which perpetuates dieting. So, for example, consistent mirror checking or consistent mirror avoiding. People are either frequent checkers or frequent avoiders, and this goes with the scales as well. And neither is good. You don't want to never, ever, ever weigh yourself. Like, I know a lot of body positivity are like, throw out the scales. Oh my God, but I disagree. I think you want to get to a point where you can step on a scale and not have a meltdown. Like, yes, you might feel a bit upset or disheartened, but you don't want to go to that complete opposite, because it's just a number, it's data. You want to disconnect from it. So stopping any extreme behaviors. Comparison making, huge body image issue. People are comparing their 24-hour body with a 15-second highlight reel on Instagram, forgetting that these people are trying to sell you something.
What is that impact of diet culture on mental health? How much has social media fueled the situation that we're in terms of women? Because you see on social media, and it's great. We have some accounts where I've seen women, showing what they look like in a mirror and then showing, if they stop posing, what it actually really looks like. But how much has social media fueled the way that we're viewing all of this?
So much. There was a study done and they found that people who spent 30 minutes a day on social media reported greater dissatisfaction with their body and body image. However, I will add, it comes down to what you're looking at. And usually people's social media feeds are unrealistic, thinner, more successful, more rich. Like, how many people are you following who don't have that? How many diverse pages are you following? People with different skin types, different body types, in larger bodies. There's so many wonderful body positivity pages, women in curvier bodies. So if this is you and you feel bad when you go down social media, I want you to ask yourself, who are you comparing yourself to? Because I doubt you're comparing yourself to the guy with the 6-pack of beer and the beer gut. Do you know what I mean? It's always not, you look at a lot of studies, the people we compare ourselves to, it's not an accurate representation of the population.
I do like a little social media audit every 6 months to a year where I literally go through it. And if there's an account that is making me feel bad about myself, or it's not helpful, or it's not inspiring, or it's triggering, I literally unfollow. I'm like, my mental real estate is so important to me at this point in my life that I am not willing to follow content that is just going to put me in any heightened state, whether it's, too positive or too negative. It's just not worth it.
100%, exactly. And I give people an exercise. I say, do you know what? The next time you go out on the street, compare yourself to every third person you see and tell me what you notice. And I'll be like, oh my God, people at the beach aren't all supermodels. Because people with eating disorders, disordered eating, have this thing called attentional bias, and their attention is biased. They're looking at the people who are taller. They're looking at the people who are thinner, which makes them think they are more abnormal. It's actually called visual adaptation. So essentially, when you always look at people who are taller, thinner, skinnier, more toned, you're going to see yourself as above average and an outlier.
And that negative self-talk would just self-perpetuate.
Yes. And changing your body is not the answer. It's changing your mind, because when you actually reprogram your brain, you change your state. When you think, you know what, I'm so proud I went to the gym. I'm so grateful for what my body does for me. That puts you in a good state. You feel good, you feel vibey. And when you feel good, you're more likely to do the behaviors that you're trying to negatively punish yourself to do. When you have a good energy and a good vibe and you're like, yes, I deserve love at any way, shape and size. Yes, I'm capable. You're going to feel good. And then good stuff is going to come into your life and you're more likely to do the behaviors you want to do. Like imagine, Brittany, if you walked around saying, do you know what, who am I to study PMDD? You know what, I don't have the degree yet. I don't have this yet. I don't have that yet. Imagine if you had those thoughts, would you be doing the work you're doing?
Absolutely not.
Exactly.
It's so interesting that changing states. I went to Tony Robbins, I think it was last year, and that was the biggest lesson that I had learned. Like, I know not everyone's a big Tony Robbins fan. Even myself, I was a little bit skeptical. I was like, is this going to go one way or the other? But it was one of the biggest things I walked away with was changing your state. And by changing your state, as you said, your behavior will change. Like by changing even the way that you were standing, it would completely change what you would do next. And it was one of the biggest lessons that I learned from that. And you've just basically reinforced that for me. So thank you.
It's so true. And your state comes down to what you tell yourself. And if anyone's listening, do an experiment tomorrow. When you wake up, I want you to say to yourself, today is going to be an amazing day. I am so capable. I trust myself. I'm strong. I'm going to do a great session at the gym, or I'm going to be so joyful, whatever it is. Start your morning with that. How many people do you know start their morning with that? Most people start their morning with, oh, I'm so tired. Need coffee. Oh, I can't be bothered. Oh, another day.
What would you say
I'm
then
guilty of that too.
But what would you say to someone, a woman that's, they're in a really bad place in their life, that things might not be externally going so well, or their mental state has declined so much, and is that they might have this really unhealthy relationship with the food? Obviously we've just talked about changing state, which can help, but would the biggest thing for a woman like that be is just patience and, as you said, consistency over time? Like trying to change that overnight and just waking up feeling grateful and happy and all these great thoughts isn't going to happen obviously in 24 hours. So is it really just a matter of them really staying consistent and patient?
It's getting help, Brittany. That's the main thing. Women who have an eating disorder or disordered eating, it takes up to 10 years to get support, right? Recovery takes 1 to 6 years to fully recover from an eating disorder. So if you are waking up every day, and I have women messaging me all the time, they're like, oh, I've been following you for years, or, I'm just too scared. And I get it. I get it's scary, but what's scary is your life passing you by and you're 70 years old and you're like, shit, I'm too scared to wear that or be that way. So to be honest, Brittany, if anyone's listening to this, don't be afraid to get help. Life isn't going to get better. And do you know what? The help can help you get better quicker. And this is why I think Food Freedom, which is the program I run, is successful, is because it's really intense. There's a group to hold you accountable, and you just focus on this one thing for 12 weeks. Whereas if you just go at this on your own, you're kind of in the dark. Like when I need help, I'll always go to a coach. When I'm struggling, I'll go to whoever, a health expert. Get help for it. You go to the doctor if you're sick. Same as with your relationship with food. You don't need to do this alone.
I am a gigantic advocate for therapy. Like, I'm someone who started therapy when I was 21 because I had really severe trauma when I was a child, both health and physical and abuse as well. And I'm just such a big fan of it. I think therapy has the amazing ability to make you self-aware and aware of the behaviors and the patterns and the things so that you then have the choice if you want to shift it or not. Again, you can go to therapy and you might then decide this is too hard, this is too confronting. And there's been times where I went to therapy where I was like, I don't know if I can do this. It was so confronting. And I just kept showing up every second week. I was doing it every 2 weeks. And it was terrifying sometimes to actually have to confront the pain that was really deep inside from some past trauma. But I'm just such a big advocate. I think nearly everyone should be in therapy at some point because it really can progress you forward. I've even got my parents now in therapy.
And consistently. Oh my God, I love that. And consistently, this is what annoys me. Okay. So yes, I've been a psychologist for many years now, but unless someone's willing to see me weekly, fortnightly, I won't work with them unless in some cases where I worked with people for a long time, then yes, they just check in monthly. I call it mental health maintenance, but you cannot expect to see a psychologist once a month, once every 3 weeks, inconsistently, and actually see your mental health improve. And I understand this is also the fault of the psychologist. But some people are so booked out that they can't see their clients regularly. And I don't think that's appropriate. So if you're in therapy, really ask yourself, have I really committed to this consistently over a long period of time? How long have you been in therapy for? You know what I mean? If you're not getting the result you want, it's time to reassess.
And that's even something I noticed. So I was with a previous psychologist many years ago, and I wasn't really necessarily getting anywhere with this particular psychologist. She was really lovely, but for the way that I worked, it was a little bit more talk therapy, and I needed a lot of somatic awareness of emotions that were happening in the body. So I found a different psychologist and changed, and I just kept persisting until I found the right one that was really going to get in there and start shifting some things. So again, you have to keep going. You have to keep showing up. I even remember when I went, everyone was like, you're still going? And I'm like, I'm still going because I still have things to learn and I'm still not exactly where I want to be. Of course, we're always going to be a work in progress, lifelong learnings, but I knew that I needed to stay consistently over a period of time to really rewire the way that I was behaving from my past.
That's so judgmental for people to say, you're still in therapy. You know what? You're still drinking every weekend. You're still in the same spot you were 3 years ago. What's wrong with going to therapy? It's awesome. It builds your awareness, and it's like going to the gym. You don't just stop when you're like, okay, I'm healthy now. My joints are better. Some people drop out because they think, oh, I'm good now. And yes, there comes a time where you can definitely terminate and stop your therapeutic journey. But I don't like that when someone's like, oh, you're still there. They should be encouraging you and being supportive. And yes, 80% of the therapeutic outcome comes down to the relationship with your therapist. So it's really important you find someone you connect and vibe with. So well done on not giving up on that.
No, I just knew I needed someone to shift me. I think I was someone, as I said, I was someone who wasn't really aware of, as a gymnast, I went through a lot in my life, and I was learnt to hold things in. I was always someone who was expressive, and I cried a lot. It wasn't that I wasn't emotionally from the surface. And that's where everyone would be like, you're so emotional though. And I was like, yeah, but I'm so terrified of feeling the emotions actually deep at their core. So I knew I needed to find a new therapist who had the ability to really get in there and start being like, you're terrified of feeling that range of emotion in your body. And I had to learn. And that's why it was so scary and so uncomfortable. Sometimes I was like, this is too overwhelming. I don't want to do this, but persisted. And what do you know, she shifted so many things in me. I'm so grateful for her because she was the little key piece that I needed at the time.
Yeah. And I think it's important to highlight that therapy is not fun. Therapy is going to be hard and it's challenging, and you might feel worse before you feel better. But do you know what's hard? Living a life of unresolved stuff.
Absolutely. And that's what I was not willing to do. And I never have in my life. I've never been someone who's been willing. I'm like, if I don't fix this 5 years down the track, this is going to be worse, or it's not going to give me the outcome of the life that I'm actually truly desiring deep down. So I knew that just showing up and doing the hard work is what it takes. It really does.
That's what it takes. Yeah, good on you. It's so good.
Is there anything that we haven't covered today or that you'd like to add that would be really important for the women that are listening?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're listening to this and you do struggle with your relationship with food, I want you to know that changing your body won't fix it. right? Like, yes, you can always have these goals, whether it's to change your body composition or get more fit or get more athletic, whatever it is, but you really have to heal from the bottom up. That might take weight gain. And I know weight gain is scary. Not everyone gains weight. If you've been restricting for a long time, your weight might change, but it might be a journey you need to go through, right? I gained 10 kilos when I was going through my journey in my year. And I really had to learn to exist in that body and accept it. And that was like, you know what, Steph, if you loved and accepted and respected your body, what would you be doing? Okay, I'd be dating. I'd put myself out there. And doing all those things actually made me realize there's nothing wrong with you. There are men who think you're absolutely fine in this body weight, shape and size, even though you're not okay with it. I went for my goals. I went for my dreams. I still went to the gym. I acted like I was recovered. And then through that process, then things did change and I felt so much better. So heal yourself from the inside out, not the outside in.
Thank you so much, Steph. I think this has been so valuable, and I think women are going to get a lot out of. There's been so many nuggets in this interview that women can take from, including myself. So thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for speaking particularly on this topic of food and our relationship as women with it. I think it's been incredible.
Thank you, Brittany. I've loved it. This has been really good. I can't wait to hear it.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I am truly grateful for you being here. If you got something out of today's show, please take a moment to leave a rating or review. To access more resources or support, check out the show notes below. See you next time.